Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 2nd Tuesday meeting of the Auxiliary Markings Club. We're very glad that you're here. This is a regular event for us, so if this is your first time with us, we're very glad that you've joined us, and we hope that you'll enjoy the evening. Just a couple of things. If you're not a member of the Auxiliary Markings Club, you should ask yourself why not. It's a wonderful organization with a long history of excellent research, a beautiful newsletter slash journal, and you can become a member for $15 for a digital membership. So you might want to give that some thought. The address can be found at postal-markings.org. And please check us out on our social media page, which you can find on Facebook. We're also on YouTube. Both of these can be linked through our splendidly new, revised, and refreshed website. You just have to go to social media and you'll be able to find those. And Doug Quine, who's done all the work on it, has actually uploaded the links to all of the YouTube videos, so you can find them there. Just want to highlight for one more month that we've published, along with the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada, an anthology called Considering Auxiliary Markings, and it contains 16 articles on widely divergent subjects from across the globe that relate to auxiliary markings. It's available for free as a download from the Auxiliary Markings website, so please feel free to avail yourself of that. We're very excited about it. So our presenter tonight is Ken Snelson, who I know through my association as a Canadian with the Canadian philatelic world. Ken is an elected fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, and somebody that I really respect as a philatelist. His research is just really spectacular. So I'll give you a little bit of information about Ken, and then we'll begin. Ken was born in, as he pulls the screen down, Ken was born in the UK in 1942. He started collecting stamps at an early age. Together with his 11-year-old brother, he bought his first penny black at the age of 7 from a stamp dealer in Liverpool for 7 shillings. Stamp collecting continued until he left home for Cambridge University to study engineering. He took a break from philately for a few years while he started a career in a family. He came to Canada in 1969 to work for Ontario Hydro and resumed collecting Great Britain stamps. By the late 1970s, the basic collection was nearing completion, at least all that could be afforded. I think we've all been through that. And he started collecting British auxiliary and surcharge markings as a cheap sideline. In the 1980s, he realized that he was accumulating GB tax marks that had not been previously recorded, and he started to maintain a list of these marks. Articles on these marks have been published in a number of philatelic journals, eventually leading to a book on United Kingdom Taxe Marks for international mail, which was published in 2007. The tax marks and postage due collection, now no longer cheap for certain, have been exhibited nationally and internationally. For about 25 years ago, Ken started a new collection of stationery and other items related to UK return letter offices. Having done considerable research on the RLO, Ken co-authored a book, The Returned Letter Offices of Great Britain to 1912 and Beyond, which was published in 2017 by the Royal Philatelic Society of London. Ken is a member of the North Toronto Stamp Club, the British Postmark Society, and the Postage Due Study Group. He joined the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada in 1991. After retiring from his engineering career in 2006, he assumed the role of secretary of the PSSC. Ken has won several gold medals at the national level for his exhibits on postage due and return letter office markings. So Ken, I'm going to turn this over to you now. Let me stop my share, and I will let you go ahead.
Okay, well, let's see if my share screen still works.
Good. Yeah, there we go. Excellent.
You got it.
Got it.
Okay, well, we'll make it fill the screen. And we will go to presentation mode. Okay.
Perfect.
So anyway, let's see. This is a story that nominally starts in 1887, but it really only doesn't start until 2011. And I want to acknowledge Douglas Muir. Douglas Muir, picture on the left. I made the initial discovery that started all this, but all the information from the Post Office archives was found and summarized by Douglas, who at that time was the senior curator of philately at the British Postal Museum. Douglas has authored many books on British philately, and he continues to be interested in these marks. Let's go back to the origin of it. This is the UPU requirement to mark the reason for return on international mail that couldn't be delivered. And it started in 1886 when Heinrich von Stephan, who I think you may be familiar with as one of the architects of the Postal Union, he made the original proposal that led to the General Postal Union in 1875. And he made a proposal that the receiving office, the receiving office should advise the originating office of the reason for non-delivery for any international mail that couldn't be delivered. The reasons had to be in French, which was the UPU language, and I've listed here the reasons that they proposed, which translate to unknown, refused, not reclaimed, gone away, or gone without address, and deceased. He also suggested the countries could include their own language as well as French, and they could use labels or hand stamps as they chose. He included sample labels of what he proposed, and those are similar labels, and similar labels were later used in Germany and many other European countries, which is shown on the next slide. These are the sample labels that were attached to the January 1886 UPU circular. And you can see they're kind of on a whitish paper with a green border and bilingual text in the middle. And these are German French. And these are taken from a October 2011 article by Douglas Muir in the London Philatelist. If you've seen these labels before, and I know Greg has, you'll see that they're very similar to the labels that were used in many European countries. So, what did the regulation actually say? This is the regulation that was agreed for implementation on the 1st of April 1887, and it was restated in the 1891 UPU Convention. Before returning to the Office of Origin correspondence which for any reason has not been delivered, the Office of Destination must indicate in a clear and concise manner in the French language on the back of such articles the cause of the non-delivery in the following form: not known, refused, gone away, not claimed, deceased, etc. Now those are in English because this is the English translation of the convention regulation. This indication is furnished by the application of a stamp or by affixing a label. Each office has the option of adding a translation in its own language of the cause of non-delivery and any other useful particulars. So that's the regulation that started all of this. Now, Douglas had studied these labels for 30 years. He had written 2 comprehensive articles with extensive lists of references. And the one was in the London Philatelist in December 2004. Another was in the London Philatelist in October 2011. And you'll probably see that Greg Redner, our president, has been studying the labels at least of Belgium and Yugoslavia. He may have studied others, I don't know. But he's also been studying them. So that was the situation in 2011. And at that point, I bought this postcard in a small auction in England run by a guy called Bill Pipe, called the Magpie auction. And you'll see it has on it "In Carnu Not Known" with the French and the English. And no one I consulted had ever seen a bilingual French-English label. Douglas Muir's comment, which he put onto a later article when he saw this, "Despite my incredulity at something I had never even contemplated before, it was clearly genuine." And Douglas, as curator of philately, was well placed to search the post office archives. So anyway, he did that. And he wrote an article in 2012. He wrote quite a considerable article in Gibbon Stamp Monthly. He says, "Return to sender labels were used by many of the world's postal administration from the 1880s onwards. Douglas Muir has been collecting these labels for over 30 years, and until recently had not been aware that they had been used in Britain. This discovery led him to investigate the files at the British Postal Museum and Archive with surprising results." So a lot of what follows is his research, either from what he published in the Gibbon Stamp Monthly article, or what he communicated with me directly, because some of the illustrations, he arranged to get me the illustrations from the archives. So what he found in the archives was a file, "International Postal Union Treatment of Undelivered Correspondence." This 1886 to 87 file gives the full story, and we're going to go through some of that. But first of all, I'm going to do a bit of a sidestep, something to bring you into the picture of what the situation was in Britain. The man who was responsible for implementing the UPU regulation was George W. Smith, and he was the head of the Return Letter Office. And he was a remarkable man in addition to his post office career. He painted watercolors, he drew pen and ink sketches, he played the flute, he experimented with photography in the 1850s, which I think is pretty early for photography. He invented a telegraphic device, which he displayed at the 1851 Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace. And on the left is a picture of him after his retirement. The picture is about 1900. So his post office career. He joined the Returned Letter Office, or the Dead Letter Office, in 1839 at the age of 21. Most of his career was in the Dead, or later Returned Letter Office. In 1867, he became controller of the Returned Letter Office, where he was very influential in setting policy on returned mail for all of the United Kingdom. And he retired, despite claiming that he felt up to doing the job. He was forced to retire at the end of 1891. And he wrote an autobiography full of anecdotes, but little hard information on postal operations. And this autobiography was called "Half a Century in the Dead Letter Office," and I have a copy of it. It was a private publication, and there are only a certain number printed. I don't know. Anyway, it's one of the prizes of my Returned Letter Office collection. This, and it gives a lot of background to things, but not a lot of information on how the Dead Letter Office actually worked. But anyway, this is how returned undeliverable international mail was handled. Prior to 1873, there were returned letter offices in London, Edinburgh, and Dublin. From 1873 to 1889, Smith organized returned letter branches. They were in 8 English provincial cities, 3 additional Scottish cities, and 2 additional Irish offices. But until 1912, Edinburgh, Dublin, and all the RLBs were instructed to send all undeliverable international mail to London. So only London needed to implement the UPU regulation. So anyway, this is how Smith handled it. He initially favored the labels over the hand stamps. He did an estimate. He thought he needed 2 extra offices because he had to return each week 2,300 letters and postcards and 6,000 circulars and book packets. And the UK voted in favour of the proposal for the regulation. In February 1887, Smith submitted sketches of proposed labels. This is all stuff that's in the file. Unlike the approved labels, the English is above the French. You can see that on the right. The reasons proposed by the UPU, not known, gone away, refused, etc., were all included. But he also had 4 additional reasons: no such street, insufficient address, house occupied, and ship not arrived. So anyway, the sketches were tidied up, and you can see the tidied version on the left, and they were sent to the colonies, informing them of the new regulations. The changes from the initial sketches were that the French was now above the English, and house unoccupied became empty house. And on the 14th of March, 1887, the printed labels were ordered so that they would be ready for introduction on the 1st of April. And on the 6th of April, specimens were sent to the secretary, and some examples are still contained in the file, as you can see below. There's 8 of them there, 8 different reasons. On the right, also in the file, is a whole sheet of the refused or refused labels, and they were in sheets of 50. You can see that it's 5 across and 10 down. So that's the labels now had been produced. But Smith wasn't happy. On the 1st of June 1887, Smith reported to the secretary that fixing labels is slow and interferes with more important dealings. And he was only using the labels on letters and postcards. For book packets and circulars, he was stamping them with brass hand stamps with reasons in French. Now you can see the reasons on the right. I have never seen a used example of those hand stamps, but they're probably around if somebody knows where to find one. Anyway, stamping, he said, was 5 times faster than labeling, and he asked permission to give up the labels and change to stamping. He also said the brass hand stamps were proving unsatisfactory because the ink was oily and messy, and the hand stamps soon wore out. So he proposed changing to rubber hand stamps. On the 26th of July, he put that proposal forward, and on the 12th of August, a whole series of return for reasons stated marks were issued to be used with violet ink. And what we have on the right is a page from the impression books in London showing the impressions of the stamps that were issued. The text that is superimposed on it is my transcription of the text in the marks, because the text in the marks is probably a bit hard to read at this level. And so you can see the reasons on the right. And they're the reasons we've been talking about. There were 9 types on this page, including the 5 specified by the UPU and the 4 additional reasons: street unknown, insufficient address, ship not arrived, and empty house. But that wasn't all. Also, on the 12th of August, there's another page in the impression books which has these marks, also bilingual, also giving reasons for return to sender, but some quite unusual ones. The top one is addressed to a post office where there is no poste restante, which is pretty interesting and different reason. The next one down is returned to England without a reason for non-delivery, and that's fairly common. The next one is addressed to initials contrary to rule, and that's very unusual. And then we have found without address, firm dissolved, and ship sailed. Now, there were no labels. I believe that the Return Letter Office stopped using labels on 12th of August, 1887. And so labels were only used for about 4 months on returned mail and returned letter and postcard mail to non-English speaking countries. And I think that explains the scarcity of the labels. The reason that we could live for 130 years without knowing that these things ever existed until my discovery in 2011. And this is coming back to my discovery copy and give you the analysis of it. It was mailed in June 1887 by the brokers in Amsterdam for the Amsterdam, Liverpool, Manchester service of the British and Continental Steam Packet Company. On the 27th of June, delivery was attempted in Liverpool, and the manuscript was written on it at the top, firm not known. On the 28th of June, there's a back stamp, Returned Letter Office, Liverpool. But as I've already told you, the returned letter branches in places like Liverpool had to send their returned international mail to the Returned Letter Office in London. And so on the 29th of June, it's in the Returned Letter Office, London, and the label, the not known, is applied, and it was returned to the Netherlands. So that's the analysis of that. Now, Douglas Muir has been diligently searching for these. I don't think there's much point in searching for them in North America because they're only sent to non-English speaking countries. And I suspect even Quebec, they've considered an English speaking country. But anyway, Douglas has found, and he has got quite a lot of contacts in Europe, and he's found 3 examples of these labels used. June 1887 to Germany, August 1887 also to Germany, and July 1887 also to Germany. And I believe this confirms that the use was between April and August 1887, and it explains why these things are so darn scarce. Anyway, that isn't the end of the story quite, because the British labels were also supplied to the colonies. The 11th of March 1887 circular was sent to colonies asking if they wanted to use labels, and if so, how many of each label they required. Most offices asked for labels, and most of them asked for about 500 labels of the most common, that was the most common number, and they had to ask separately for each reason. And 1,000 labels were sometimes requested, and the lowest requests were 200. Now, Barbados, Cyprus, and India declined, saying usage would be negligible. And I've put Barbados in bold characters here, because it comes again into the later in this story. And this is the full list of the requests. And you can see them. I don't expect you to. You can see that there's a list of colonies on the left. There's columns for each individual reason, and the colonies could indicate how many of each reason they wanted. And you can see that a lot of 500s in it, and a lot of thousands, and a few 200s. So there's thousands of these labels were sent to the colonies when you actually figure that out. But they also have proved very scarce. Douglas has found 3. He's found a 1991 gone away from Bermuda, returned to Macau. He's found a September 1895 one from Belize to Honduras, and an 1897 one from St. Vincent to Germany. You'll notice the dates. The labels were used in the colonies long after they'd been abandoned in the United Kingdom. And I suspect that what they did was, having received all these labels, they used them up, I would think. Anyway, he's found those 3. Which then brings you back to why I got interested in these things again last year, late last year. And that's because I found this one. This is a March 1887 cover from the US to Barbados. Sorry, so March 1889 cover from Barbados, used in Barbados. In March 1887, Barbados said it didn't want a supply of labels, but they must have changed their mind, because on the 20th of March 1889, this label was used in Barbados. The envelope is mailed in New York to a Miss D.H. Irving, care of Thomas Hall, Yacht Republic, probably the name of the ship, in Bridgetown, Barbados. It's directed per SS Muriel, and that's a ship that plied between New York and the West Indies. And there's a manuscript vertically on it, left Barbados, and we have the party gone away label. 7th of June 1889, there's a New York back stamp. They tried to return it to Miss Ballard, but she couldn't be found. And there's a 3rd of July 1889 dead letter office back stamp, a US dead letter office back stamp. So that's pretty much the story of the labels. Why don't we want to go on?
Thanks, Ken. It's fascinating. Were you, when you bought the card that contained the first label, was that something, did you know it was on there at the time, or was it just in a lot, or did you buy it as a single for that reason?
I bought it as a single for that reason. I knew it was unusual. Okay. I knew it was unusual, but I didn't know how unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anyway, I've managed to get it to move on now.
Okay.
I was going to continue with some of the bilingual hand stamps. And I have quite a sizable collection of these. I have a 1-frame exhibit of some of the better ones. And I'm not going to bore you all with everything, but I did think I would show you a few of the more unusual ones. So, as I said, I've got the impression books. I showed you the impression books from the 12th of August, 1887. There were some later issues also to the return letter office, and you can see minor typographical differences, like some items have got a capital letter and some items have got a full stop and some haven't. But they're insignificant. They didn't consider them significant. They were just accidents of production. These bilingual labels were used in the London return letter office and also in some colonial offices. So I'm going to show you some uses in London with reasons that were not used by other countries. And I'll show you a couple of items used in colonial offices. Now this one, you can see the lower part of the back of the envelope has got Vaisson Parter, ship sailed. And here's the image from the proof books of September the 12th, 1887. And this was mailed on 10th of May, 1900 in Berlin. 11th of May, it was received in Southampton with a back stamp. And there's a very prominent too late ship sailed in English, which was almost certainly applied in Southampton. I don't know whether it was applied by the Southampton Post Office or by one of the shipping companies. Anyway, on the 17th and 18th, it has the 17th and 18th of May Southampton date stamps, and it has Vesso Party ships sailed, which almost certainly was applied in London Return Letter Office. It then has, and the 31st of May and the 1st of June, it has various German date stamps for redirections. So it's quite a busy cover, but it's a nice example of a rather difficult return to sender marking. Now this one is a mystery. I think I said when I introduced it that the addressed to initials contrary to rule was very unusual. Well, this is the only one I've ever seen. And you can see that it's here on this side here. And this is was proofed on the 12th of August, 1887 on the left-hand side there. Now, this is a little bit complicated. It was mailed on the 14th of August, 1901 in France. And it was mailed to Miss Mary Vamour at a convent in Weymouth. It probably had a 10 centimes French stamp on the picture side. If you look at the top right of the picture side, you can see a place where it's pretty obvious that the stamp has been removed. And there's a triangular French tax mark saying that the French people considered it underpaid. And it would have been 15 centimes underpaid on the 25 centime letter rate. And in the London newspaper branch, there was a contrary to regulations NPB, which is also a fairly unusual marking. And in the inland section in London, that 15 centimes deficiency was doubled to 30 centimes, which is the usual UPU rule, and it was marked with threepence postage due. 30 centimes it becomes threepence. You can see the overlap with my postage due collection here, can't you? Anyway, we'll go on and see what's on the next slide. So it has this addressed to initials contrary to rule. On the 17th of August in Weymouth, delivery was attempted. There's a manuscript saying refused. And it has this addressed to initials contrary to rule, which must have been applied back in the London Return Letter Office. But I have no idea why that was applied. The only rule I can find in all the post office documents I've studied that prohibited addressed to initials is in the rules of post-restaurant mail. Post-restaurant mail could not be sent addressed to initials. But this is no indication that it's post-restaurant. And the addressee's name is fully spelled out. It's not addressed to initials. So why on earth this mark was applied, I don't know. But this is the only way I've been able to get this particular marking. House closed. Well, here's another busy one. This is a rule that nobody else seemed to use. This particular version of it was proofed in May 1896. I think it's slightly different to the one in 1887. This was mailed on the 24th of August in Altaussee, Austria. It's paid 5 heller, which was equivalent to 5 centimes, which was short on the 10 heller UPU postcode rate. In London Foreign Branch, 2 times the 5 centimes deficiency was 10 centimes, which gives you a penny postage due. And you've got the penny FBB marking. On the 27th and 28th of August, 4 attempts were made to deliver in Acton. And there's a manuscript written on the 2/3 of the way down on the left-hand side of the front, taken out repeatedly and no answer to be obtained. On the 4th of September, it was in the Return Letter Office, London, and the house closed mark was applied. There's also a retour marking, which was probably applied in Austria. And the 19th of September, there's an Altaussee mark showing that it was back in Altaussee on the 19th of September. Okay, Now, this is an around the world cover. You could say it's a little bit philatelic, or actually you could say it's quite a lot philatelic. But it's something I rather like. It was mailed on the 11th of September, 1899 in Asheville, North Carolina, addressed to Japan. And it was obviously intended to create a round the world cover, because the instructions at the top left say, if not called for in 5 days, forward to Constantinople, Turkey. If not there, return in 5 days to C.C. Kennedy, Asheville, North Carolina, USA. There's a 17th of September San Francisco machine mark on the back, and the 19th of October date stamp for Yokohama in Japan. And it was redirected to the British Post Office in Constantinople as requested. And on the 27th and 29th of November, 1899, there are postmarks of the British Post Office in Constantinople. And there, it was the 4th of December. It was back in the return letter office in London. And there they put on the return to England without a reason for non-delivery mark that had been proofed on the 20th of November of 1888. As again, this is one of the later issues, but the reason had been there since 1887. And so we have the return letter office London, the return to England bilingual mark. And on the 19th of December, it was in the US dead letter office. And on the, we've gone back, we shouldn't. And on the, I think the, let's get this. And okay, I've gone back one slide. On the 20th of December, it was back in Asheville, North Carolina, with a machine mark on the back. And so Mr. Kennedy got his around the world cover. He got a cover to go from USA to Japan to Constantinople, back to via Britain, back to the USA, all for 5 cents. Sounds like a pretty good bargain for me. Anyway, that's the return to England without reason for non-delivery. I have another one here. This is received in damaged condition in the return letter office, London. Not too many of these around, there are a few. This was mailed in January 1895 in Rugby, England, to South Boston, USA. And then 24th of January to the 16th of February, it was in South Boston. There's a manuscript not known on the back, and there's an advertised on the front, cannot be found on the back. This is not a bilingual, this is an English language, cannot be found on the back, which almost certainly was applied in the USA. And then there's an inconnu in French on the front, which was probably applied in the return letter office in the USA. So this is received in damaged condition in London, in the return letter office, London. Now then, I said that some of these stamps were sent to colonies, or foreign post offices. At the top is a reproduction of the marks in the impression book that was sent to Constantinople on the 3rd of September, 1893. 1893, yes. Now the postcard on the right was mailed in February 1903 in the port of Spain, Trinidad. And on the 2nd of March, it was in the British Post Office, Constantinople. There was a stamp on the picture side, which would have paid a postcard rate, but of course on the picture side, at least the British Post Office didn't recognize that as being okay for postcards. and postcards with stamps on the picture side were charged as unpaid letters. Now, if this had been addressed to England, the 1 penny stamp would have been okay, because Trinidad was in the 1 penny British Empire 1 penny scheme. So even the letter would only cost a penny. But the empire rate didn't apply to the British Post Office in Constantinople. For one reason, the Turkish authorities wouldn't allow the British Post Office in Constantinople to charge lower rates than the standard UPU rates, because that would have been undercutting their rate. So anyway, in Constantinople, it was treated as a penny halfpenny underpaid on the twopence halfpenny UPU letter rate. So double deficiency was threepence. There's a threepence K66 charge mark of the BPO Constantinople, and it was refused by the addressee, and the refused mark that they had in Constantinople was applied, and it was returned to Trinidad via London. There's a London date stamp on there of the 12th of March. So that's a Constantinople one. I think this is probably the last one. This is unclaimed. And again, this is from the impression books in London. Well, this is unknown. There were the impression books in London issued on the 9th of December, 1892 to Bahamas. I didn't find in the impression books, I have actually been and looked through the impression books in London, and I didn't find any other marks like this sent to colonies, but there might have been, so well, they might just not have been recorded. Anyway, this was mailed in 1893 in Guernsey, and it was mailed to somebody in the Leicestershire Regiment in Bahamas. It was undeliverable in the Bahamas, and this inconnu unknown hand stamp was applied on the front. I've put this upside down so that you can read the hand stamp. The 3rd to 6th of October, it was back in the UK, and there were multiple delivery attempts at barracks in South Wigston and Leicester. Now that's actually nostalgia for me, because I was brought up 14 miles from Leicester, so I know some of these places. Okay, but anyway, the delivery attempts were unsuccessful, and on the 7th of October, it was in the returned letter branch, Nottingham, and there's a returned letter branch, Nottingham hand stamp on there. Nottingham had a returned letter branch and Leicester did not. It's not clear whether it was returned to Guernsey. Okay, so let's just close this off now. This is a bit of the continuing history and so on. In 1912, the UK return letter offices were reorganised. 8 provincial return letter branches were closed. The remaining provincial return letter branches were allowed to return foreign mail directly to the country of origin. Unilingual French marks returned to non-English speaking countries were issued to them. So from 1912, the UPU requirement for marking the reason of non-delivery could be met by a unilingual French mark, a bilingual French or French-English mark, or to English-speaking countries, a unilingual English mark. And so that's where I'm stopping this, okay? I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, very much. Thanks, Ken. Fascinating. One of the things that struck me when you showed that sheet of a single label in 50 or 60, whichever you said it was, I couldn't remember. One
50,
label
50.
on a...
It's 5 columns, 10 rows.
Yeah, okay, so 50. That's very unusual. Most of the early labels that were produced had multiple labels on one sheet to make it easier for people to be able to tear them off and find them. The more useful the label was, the more it appeared on the sheet. So that's really, I'd never seen that before on such an early label. So that was fascinating.
I think you can see why the labels are scarce.
Yeah, I think so.
It took 120 or more years before one was found. Not that anybody was looking for them.
I have a feeling if you were doing an exhibit that you could really argue that this is a very scarce label. Nobody's seen one in 100 and, plus years. So.
I did actually. I put this exhibit into the Canadian International One Frame Exhibit exhibition in 2022. I didn't think the judges recognized the scarcity of it.
Yes. Any questions for Ken?
Ken, this is PK. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I have two questions related to India. So the first is, you said that the labels during that short period were not supplied to 3 colonies, including India. So are you aware of any locally printed labels being printed in India? That's the first question. And the second question
I'll answer
is
that. I'm not aware of any from India at all. But I
okay.
haven't really looked for them. Okay.
Thank you.
Second question.
The second question is the impression book you have of the rubber stamps. So is there any record of rubber stamps being supplied to India?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I suspect not from London is my guess. You'll notice that most of the places where hand stamps were supplied from London were smaller colonies. And I suspect that they reckoned that places like Canada, India, Australia were big enough that they looked after their own affairs. And they didn't need to have them issued from London. But that's just a guess.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I will say, Ken, without a doubt, if you ever decide to put that card up for auction, please get in touch with me first, okay?
Just the one, or are you interested in the Bahamas one as well?
No, I'd be interested in both of them for certain. So just let me know. We're in the process of selling our house, so I can increase the mortgage a little bit and may be able to afford it. So.
The houses in Toronto are fetching $1 million. I think in London they're fetching 500,000 or 600,000. So you could probably afford to pay me a good price for that.
Yes, for certain. So anyway, does anybody else have anything else that they want to? Yeah, Tom.
Hey Ken, how you doing? That's a
Hi.
very good presentation, and I never knew the history and the background of the labels to begin with. Do you know how long that style of the original labels have been used for?
Well, in the European countries, I think Greg's probably more knowledgeable on that than I am. You've certainly shown the labels from Belgium and from Yugoslavia that go way into the 1930s. And I think there are examples of the labels that go into the 1950s.
Yeah, actually, they even go later than that, Ken. There are some, especially Eastern European labels that go into the 1990s.
Okay.
And Belgium used some of the more common ones into the 1990s. So.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share a screen with you. I hope you might be able to see that.
Sure.
This is one of my prized Dear Doctor cards. That was mailed, as you'll see here, from Andorra to Germany.
Wow.
And has one of those labels on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have never known the background of the labels themselves. And certainly, again, this is 1958. And like you had mentioned there, Greg, they certainly go later than that too. But it was fascinating, even in the original green color that you showed from the 1860s-ish. Quite interesting. Still being used in Germany.
Germany is one of the countries.
I'm a little interested in that postcard. It seems to have an Andorra stamp on and a Spanish stamp.
Yep.
Was the Spanish stamp valid in Andorra?
It must have been.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been.
Didn't they have a split deal where, because Andorra's on the border of France and Spain, that there were stamps from Spain and France that got used there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
So,
Doug.
yeah, great.
I just had a quick story as sort of a addendum to your comment about that unusual addressed to initials contrary to rules.
Yeah.
I have a passion for postal barcodes and zip codes in the United States. And in 1965, when the zip codes first came out, the postal codes, I sent a letter to myself at general delivery at Poste Restante with just my initials. So it just was DBQ 01451 was the entire address, and it was successfully delivered to me. So
Okay.
obviously the United States did not have the rule against initials going to general delivery. And
Well, not at that time anyway.
no, and in 1965, and the population of the town was about 5,000 and there were not a lot of queues. So I think it was obvious who I was.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to say before we got off on the other subject, Tom, Germany is one of the few countries that has not altered their labels from day one. Still the green and black. There are a few others that have done that, but Germany's probably the primary example of that. They got rid of the black script sometime after World War II, but you know, the heavy script. Yeah, fascinating. Good.
Douglas Muir's articles in the London Philatelist have got quite a number of references to articles about the labels that were used in the various European countries.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked them all up.
And if you're able to find a copy of his book about Swiss return labels, Return to Sender, it's a textbook on how to write about this topic. It's the Bible for me. It's just a remarkable book. So certainly worth having a look for.
Well, Douglas is still a going concern. I spoke to him I emailed him last in about January, and I showed him this presentation, and he didn't suggest any changes, but he did suggest that I use an updated photograph of him. Okay, I had an old photograph, and he gave me a newer one. Okay, but he was on holiday at that time. He was on holiday in Switzerland, so he's a going concern still.
Very generous, a very generous man.
Well, that's wonderful. And your talk was quite remarkable. It's the ultimate case, I think, of looking for a needle in a haystack, and looking for a needle in a 120-year-old haystack in particular.
Well,
It's
actually,
incredible.
it's a case of accidentally finding the needle in the haystack. I didn't set out to find it. I was collecting all sorts of auxiliary markings and things like that. And this one came up that I knew was unusual, but I didn't know how unusual.
Yeah,
Well, that's the best kind.
you bet. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much once again, Ken. As I knew it would be a wonderful presentation, and we're very grateful to you for taking your time to come and share that with us. It's something that is sorry, here comes my cat, so you have to stay over there, okay? But it was something that is really kind of one-off and fascinating topic, and exciting to know that they're out there. So. And I just would like to let you know that our next presentation is going to be done by our vice president and the editor of our newsletter / journal, Andrew Kelly. He's written a wonderful article for the auxiliary markings anthology that we did. And he'll be expanding on that with talking about disinfected mail markings from the 20th century in the United States. So that's another topic that I'm sure many of us don't know anything about, and it will certainly be worthwhile attending. So Thank you again, everybody, for coming to tonight's program. And we'll be back in April with Andrew. And if you're not a member, please have a look at the website and enjoy the publications and all the things they're on. And have a great night, okay?
Thank you.